Morning, guys. How's
everybody doing?
Good.
Good. Great to be here.
Rachel, welcome, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. We are talking on a Friday morning here. And Rachel, where are you at geographically?
Brookline, Massachusetts.
Oh, right
Okay,
on.
all East Coast. That's
All
good.
East Coast. Yeah, I don't know. How's the weather up there today? It was weird.
Amazing.
Was it like 80
Halloween.
yesterday up there, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. We did it because it was Halloween yesterday, obviously, for at the time that we're recording, and we have a little 9-month-old, and it was great. We could just like go out and stroll, and it was like you just wore your costume. You didn't have to bundle up. It was great.
In shorts and flip-flops.
Yeah, I felt like the old man at the office yesterday. I'm like, remember when you had to wear the winter jacket over your costume and it kind of like ruined the whole thing? But you had that cheap ass plastic mask anyway. It really wasn't all that great.
Yeah.
It was like...
It started raining here in Baltimore this morning, and I was like, well, that makes sense. I mean, we had 80 yesterday, so a snowstorm today would probably make all the sense.
Absolute sense. Yeah, for Baltimore, definitely.
Yeah. And then it's supposed to go down to like the 60s tomorrow, then back to the 80s. I'm like, all right, so we're all just going to get pneumonia, I guess. And we'll just, so cool. Well, I want to get into this today because I what you're up to is pretty fun, but I actually am not equally, but pretty also interested in your past, because you actually touch on a bunch of interesting sort of, we'll call them societally non-normal things, right? You dancing and gymnastics and stuff. And I kind of want to hear all about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Happy to. Yeah, it's definitely like an atypical journey, I would say. You know, what's so funny is that we just moved into this apartment. And so we have all of this like baggage from other apartments we're trying to go through. And part of that is like stuff from my past. And it's so funny to see these letters that my parents had written or my coaches had written to my teachers, my academic teachers, saying like, oh, you know, Rachel has to represent her country at the Pan American Games in Brazil. And so she's going to need to be gone for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like be gone from academics for a month so I could train and then, you know, get used to the like Brazilian environment and then compete. But yeah, so that was definitely my.
Can you paint a picture real quick? What age are we talking about where those letters are?
This is like young. It's like between the ages of, I mean, I competed in Canada as a gymnast until I was 17.
When did you start? Early? Like, were you one of those like 2-year-olds out on the mat? Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, that's crazy. Like, how do you get into I mean, I'm actually have never met anybody who's performed at that level athletically. I mean, a couple NFL players we've run into here and there, but you know, I never anybody like that. I've seen, like, we all watch the Olympics and you see those kind of gymnasts and they look like they're just, I mean, really on it. How do you even get into something like that at that level? Are you just tumbling around your living room and your parents are like, oh, she looks like she's got a knack for this, or what?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the access is really important, like access to good coaching and good like gym clubs or ballet studios is important. It's not critical, but like we were in Toronto, like I grew up in Toronto, and my mother put me in ballet classes first. And they were like, oh, you know, you can also put her into gymnastics. And so they put me into what they call artistic gymnastics, which is the more popular, like Simone Biles, flipping around, much smaller humans do that type of gymnastics. But I did go into artistic gymnastics initially. They took one look at my like long self and they were like,
wrong body type. Yeah.
Right. And it just so happens that on the other side of this artistic gymnastics gymnasium, there was a rhythmic gymnastics club that happened to be one of the best in the country. And so, you know, I just got access immediately to really great training and coaching. And I had a knack for this sport. Like if I had been put in soccer or baseball or whatever, like I don't think it would have gone as well.
Right.
Not to mention those sports are so much more competitive in Canada.
Oh, they are.
Yeah. Like rhythmic gymnastics is just not like, if I was in Eastern Europe, that would have been a wholly different.
Yeah.
Right?
How about that serendipity there? You know, it's just so weird that like, you know, hey, it's right around the corner.
Yeah.
Where do you gotta go? Just go across the hall. Yeah, we don't want you here, but right there is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. And like rhythmic gymnastics is like, in order to train as a rhythmic gymnast, you need access to large spaces with very high ceilings because you're throwing apparatus, doing stuff underneath it and then catching it.
Right.
So it's not the same as like a dance studio. Like a dance studio, you can almost build or pop one up anywhere. You just need to have the right flooring.
8-foot ceiling, you're good to go.
Yeah. But gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, you need like a very specific space. So for them to have that in the middle of like Toronto.
It was sort of an interesting thing. So rhythmic gymnastics, I totally not what we're talking about, but I'm just curious, like, is that sort of like a separate like lineage altogether from like the balance beam and all the other stuff? Like, is that just like its own little thing?
Nobody's cross training, right?
Yeah. I think that they probably started as like the same thing. And like in artistic gymnastics, you have the beam and the uneven parallel bars and the vault or whatever. And the floor routine, even in artistic gymnastics, used to be very dance oriented and creative and artistic. Now it's just like tricks and flips and whatever. Right. But rhythmic gymnastics is all floor routines. The difference is that you have like a rope or a ball or a ribbon. You have different apparatus that you're working with in different routines, but they're all on the floor. You're not flipping around. It's more like tricks, really interesting tricks with the apparatus.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, you know what's funny? I've noticed that we were talking about this with football recently, because American football, if you rewind into like the 70s and the 80s, you had what I guess we could refer to as like relatively normal size human beings performing at a relatively human scale of athleticism, right? And I think across the board now, and you kind of touched on it here, but across the board, it seems like athletics has gotten so razor sharp that these people, now you've got 350-pound guys that can do like a 4-second 100-yard dash, which is just bonkers, right? Like, you're like, how is that human?
How are you that big and moving that
how
fast?
How are you doing that? Like, it's not, you used to have these corn-fed motherfuckers on the front line of a football team. They were just big and
they were just fat in a lot of cases. They were just fat
who were just like, nope.
Nobody's moving me. Yeah.
And now they're like, oh, by the way, I can also jump 40 inches. You're like, come on now. What is going on here?
The Olympics now are like superhuman.
Yeah,
it's so crazy because they were showing videos of the 1970s gymnastics, and you're like, oh, that's doable.
You're like, I could almost do that. I mean,
I think I could land that one.
Yeah. But like, you're a great, and this is actually kind of why I was curious to hear a little bit about this, is like, how is that on your body? Like, in general, like, I mean, that feels torturous on your, I mean, from my stupid person.
Level of training at that, I guess, apex seems like it's just so demanding.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, I mean, it is, but of course it's all a gradual incline and development up to it, right? And if you're starting young, your body gets used to certain movements and capabilities and all that. But certainly now I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, right.
I look at pictures of me doing gymnastics and stuff in the past, and I'm like, well, that's like a hard no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, sure. I mean, you've already kind of climbed that mountain, so you really have no reason to go backwards. But but like, secondarily, like, I mean, that was gotta be, I mean, geez, I'm just looking at your time horizon. Like, that had to be totally normalized for you, like 3, whatever to 17. I mean, shit, that's like literally your entire life. I mean, seems like just what you do. It's a day ending in a Y. You wake up, you do this stuff, and what took you out of it?
So when I was 17, I moved to Boston and I joined the Boston Ballet. I danced with them for 10 years. And honestly, it was an injury.
I gotcha. And actually, that was the next thing. You weren't okay with torture enough in
So while you were doing gymnastics, you did not let go of the ballet either.
Right. Yeah, I was doing both in parallel, which was always like, the gymnastics people thought I was wasting my time in the ballet. The ballet people were like, you're going to get injured in gymnastics. So it was a constant fight. But I'm
not going to get injured. Crack. Yeah. Well.
So what was the injury, Rachel? What was it?
It was an ankle injury. Like a bursa, like a heel pain type tendon.
And still able to do ballet though.
Oh, sorry, no. The injury was what ended my career as a dancer.
Ah, okay, all right.
Gymnastics to ballet was just a transition. That was just a choice.
But I think it's funny, and I think I'm curious to see if these personality traits sort of like influenced your current thing. I suspect that they did, but like, I mean, let's just nod here real quick to the fact that you went from one very demanding, crazy, like intense sport to another one, even though you were doing them in parallel. But you also operated at a really high level as a dancer, which is completely different. I mean, compare and contrast for a second. Like, are those very, very similar things, or did one kind of like shine out as a little different of a situation? How do you think about those?
Yeah, I would say that for me, they were always very related. Boston Ballet is a like mixed rep company. And so we do classical ballets like Swan Lake and the Nutcracker, but then we also do like really interesting contemporary works that are actually very similar to gymnastics in a lot of ways, just because of the athleticism.
Is that more of like a modern dance kind of thing, or do they still call that ballet, or like how do they classify that?
Yeah, I mean, modern itself, like Martha Graham, is like a very specific style.
I see.
We wouldn't really do too much of that, but we would do like just newer contemporary works where you have these contemporary choreographers who are blending classical ballet with more dynamic athleticism, and then you get like a really unique, interesting piece of choreography.
Wow. So what were you in your mid late 20s, I guess, when you capped out on the dancing?
27.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So you've spent you're 27. All right. You've spent your whole life operating like a ninja level, like at what you're doing, and now all of a sudden you're kind of out in the cold. Like, what happened? Like, walk me through like what are you thinking at that point?
Yeah. So I had like the roughest landing after I left the ballet. When I was dancing, I had always, I think because I was doing gymnastics and ballet, and I was always very much multifaceted. Like, I wasn't the type who would like just breathe, eat, sleep, dream, just ballet. Like I was doing a lot of stuff. I got my undergrad in poli-sci while I was dancing, which is pretty rare also for professional ballet dancer at the time. But that
meaning what, they just wouldn't have an academic pursuit at all?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I just like to know at the time what you were doing, like 9 hours a day, you know? And like if these educational institutes, it's different now. Now there are more distance education and like online learning options.
Sure.
Right? So you can actually like take a more flexible, structured class. Like at the time that was more rare. But so it took me like 10 years to get my degree.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we've talked about that a lot on here. I mean, there are the educational, like, and even just meeting. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. I mean, we're in 3 different spots. I mean, Tom and I are loosely in Baltimore and probably could have done this in person if we had to, but like, this is infinitely easier. So many things are just more fluid now that we can do this. So
totally. Yeah, totally. But so I think I had discounted the structure and orientation that being a professional ballet dancer had on my life. Like when you are a dancer, even if you have other interests and other things going on the side, like you walk into a room and you're like, I'm a ballet dancer. You know, you go to bed wondering like how your body's feeling. You wake up wondering if your body's going to be able to like tackle the day ahead. Everything's very physically oriented and structured around this priority. And once I left, it was like a vacuum. There was nothing, had like nothing guiding.
There's no North Star there.
Yeah,
there's nothing to get you out of bed.
You really removed the majority of everything you were about. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was like, it was like breaking up with someone who you've been living with for 10 years and who's so a part of your life. And then all of a sudden going back to the apartment that they used to live in with you, they're gone, but all of their stuff is still there.
Sure.
And you're like, who am I without this person?
We did a watch party episode on Brian Johnson's like absolutely bonkers health routine.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things that like struck me about that is as crazy as it sounds, it is exactly what you were just mentioning. It's a
product.
His
life. Yeah.
It's laid out, right? There's a very predictable set of steps and circumstances and actions, and you know, A plus B equals C all the time. Like it's just very, very predictable, I guess, is it? And so there is a serenity in that almost, right? Like it's like I don't have to like wonder about this. Like you just it just, tomorrow will be like today, and I will just do the same thing.
And you focus on optimizing things within that structure, but you don't have to spend any time thinking about, okay, what should I do next and this and that. That was really hard. And then the other thing, honestly, that's like so hard that I was not anticipating was that like I just felt like I wasn't special anymore.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And that's got to be a whole bundle of thing to deal with, right? Like, I mean, that's pretty complex emotion right there, right?
Yeah. Because like when you're used to, again, like I said, walking into a room and saying, "Oh, I'm a professional ballet dancer," you say casually because it's your life, but for everyone else in the room, it's like, wait, that's your real job?
Yeah, that's like you get paid for this?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
You know?
And then you have this existential crisis afterwards.
Right. And so then people are like, "Oh, like, what are you up to now?" Or what are you doing now? And I was like, I literally had no idea. And then you also have to kind of accept that like you'll probably never do something that unique maybe ever again. Like what,
Well, I would say that knowing what I mean, I know the current status of this story, and I would say that I mean, at least from my perspective, I feel like you've taken a pretty healthy shot at recreating that now. I mean, I think what you guys are doing over there is pretty cool. That actually might be the perfect segue into that, actually. So, so the last step that I'm missing there between those is like, so you're having this existential crisis and whatnot. Like, how did any of that influence what you're doing now, or did we get onto a different path altogether to get to where
no, there's like a very logical thread actually, because like I retired. I actually, the first like normal job I got was at Harvard in their development offices, so fundraising.
Okay.
But I was an entry level development assistant, so I assisted the major gift fundraisers who went out and raised like 8-figure gifts.
I mean, you picked a good spot to start, though. I mean,
that's not a horrible place to land.
From an exposure standpoint.
Totally. Oh my God, totally. Well, I mean, it was like, I had a mentor who said, if you can keep your resume, it doesn't really matter what role you have, but if you can keep your resume high in terms of the brands that you're working at, you're kind of guaranteed to always be of interest to another company, right? So Boston Ballet, you're already like, okay, best of the best. And then
Ivy League school and
Harvard, like if you're interested in fundraising, like go to one of the best fundraising machines, right?
Or even if you're interested in anything Harvard has to offer, from education to networking to whatever, I mean, you could take a custodial job there and you're like, hey man, I went to Harvard.
As long as it says Harvard on the resume, the rest kind of almost is unread.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my first job. I was there for just over a year. It was incredibly humbling because I definitely walked in and I was like, I am so above this.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I realized very quickly that I had zero skills from like more of an office perspective, you know, like Excel and Word and just tracking tasks.
Yeah, where's my ribbon, dude? I want to throw that shit in the air. I don't want to like,
Yeah. But the interesting thing, and this is kind of where that thread comes in, is that people would still almost like orient themselves towards me as like a leader or authority figure, even though I was this like total entry. But it was literally just because of the way I would walk into a room, my presence, you know, things that I had learned as a dancer on stage, where like I just was always so aware of how my body was positioned, and I could always orient around a table or whatever. And to me, that was not like, to me, that was something that I had learned. And so I was like, if this is a skill or an asset in this new world, like I can teach that. I can teach that in a really interesting way.
Yeah. And it is a skill. And I have teenage kids, so a little ahead of where you're at. But those teenage kids, I mean, I drill this into them all the time. I said, look, the bar in a lot of spots has gotten a lot lower. So, you know, all you have to do is basically do what I consider second nature, which is everything you're talking about, right? It's how do you show up in a conversation? How do you show up in a room? How do you hold yourself when you're sitting around some networking party and you're like, you know, you see people, right? You see those wallflowers in the corner, their shoulders are shrunk over, they're just sort of like, not woe is me, but not woe is me. Like they're just sort of like hanging out And then there's that one person who's like blowing it up. They almost have like a ring of fire around them, and they're just like,
it's presence.
Right.
And it makes all the difference in the world. They can almost hold court, and people just walk up to them. Like it is. I mean, I've seen this thousands of times in events. It's pretty predictable.
Right. Yeah. So that was kind of a learning for me, because initially I had been like, okay, this ballet thing is completely irrelevant now. And then I was like, oh, hold on a second. Actually, I think it's very relevant. And it actually does give me this really interesting sense of experience and authority, where I can lean on it to develop this body of work, right?
Sure.
Around presence and nonverbal communication. And so I started becoming very fascinated in those spaces, and read more of the like scientific neuroscience literature that supported those things that, to me, I had learned in the ballet world. And the first business I started after I retired was choreography for business.
Oh, that's fun.
Interesting.
What a cool way to spin that, huh?
Yeah. So that was really fun. And that was more of your traditional consulting company, where I would facilitate for groups and do one-on-one coaching. And they were always experiential, like all like body orientation, own awareness focused. And that was really fun. And that's what I was going to keep doing until the pandemic happened.
Fair enough. So many stories, by the way.
Yeah, and I would even dive deeper into that, but I want to get to other stuff. I mean, it seems like it was this is how you hold yourself when you're having a conversation with another person, how I'm presenting, those kind of things, the body dynamics for different situations.
Yeah, it was like it was literally like at a basic level, like, how do you stand? How do you, like, what is your base posture? How are you standing normally? What messages might your posture be sending to other people? Are you someone who people feel comfortable approaching? Are you someone who people would prefer to just kind of be around and listen to? Like, and where are you at like base? And then where would you like to be?
Yeah. Right. It's
right?
almost like a Feldenkrais for The Office, right? Yeah. If you guys, a weird thing a lot of actors really like, and that's very cool.
Yeah. So it was just also following this argument that like the office can sometimes seem like a non-physical experience, but it is in fact very physical. It might not be a workout, but like you're there physically. Your
body's there.
So you should be including your body in the conversations you're having, and also just in the way that you sit at your desk. Like,
that's funny. I never thought about that. With any depth anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that thought ever crossed my mind at all, but you're totally right. I mean, and again, we don't go to an office much anymore, or at least not with the same regularity we used to. So it's a little different.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is absolutely, I can see how that like is pretty important. I mean, even if you want to like, I'm thinking right now, and maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking like that would affect your promotional track, but like just your overall perception by your upper people. Yeah. So, I mean, interesting.
Yeah. And actually and this kind of segues a little bit into Virtual Sapiens, but like I would argue that over video and in our remote offices, like it's still really important to not forget the physical experience, right? I think a lot of people
completely
are like, oh, my experience is just 2-dimensional on this screen. And it's like, no, like you are a 3D person.
Sure.
You're in a space. Like you have control and ownership over this space, much more so than in an office. That's amazing. But if you're sitting at your desk and you just join, like exit, join, exit, join, exit all day, like of course, by the end of the day, you're going to be like, that sucked.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because like we used to have social workers in our office, right? And then COVID hit, right? They all went virtual, and they were having a hard time coming back. And originally it was like, well, I'm missing those subtle cues. And then some of them were like, no, not only do I get to see how they're holding themselves in front of the camera, I get to see their environment. Like, where are they slumped over on the couch and they've got garbage everywhere? So they're getting an insight into a bigger part of their lives in some cases. And it's really interesting that now I'm rethinking my decor choices.
Yeah. But it is funny because we do actually, people who paid attention to that, and I'm in there. I mean, it took me an entire weekend of like meticulously arranging these pictures on the wall so that the spacing was right and everything. And all it was me just being like, look, this is going to be my backdrop for the time I'm in this space. Like, I can't have this look like shit. I don't
This
need
was
piles
10,
of
15 minutes.
Yeah.
I love it though. You guys both have the gallery walls.
Yeah, but that was not
I don't think we even
intentional.
discussed that.
Yeah, that was not
It was like
intentional.
Matt was redoing his house, and he's like, "Look, I got these awesome, like, concert posters," and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And I'm like,
Well,
"I got a bunch of random shit."
Yeah. But Rachel, you know what? It's funny. This is I don't want to get to Virtual Sapiens, so I don't want to dwell too much on this. But this is an interesting topic overall because, like, for me, these pictures I went to all these concerts, and this one right behind me is actually Hat Show Print down in Nashville, which does a lot of block posters for like the Grand Ole Opry and these old things. And I was a printmaking major for 5 minutes in college, so I really enjoyed. I just love printmaking, and but I had these in rolls for years because I didn't have a space to put them. And I still make fun of my wife for this, but the weekend I was obsessing over this. She comes in, she goes, "This looks like a fucking dorm room in here. Like, what are you doing?"
That's so
The
funny.
very first Zoom call I was on, we didn't even talk about whatever we were there to talk about. She was like, "I was at that Billy Joel concert and I was at that Pogues concert." And we had a whole conversation about the posters and everything. And like, that immediately made our relationship different, right?
Totally,
like, it was absolutely like, now I've got a friend, not a networking colleague or new business phone call, which may or may not ever talk to that person again. Right?
Yeah. No, I'm of the same opinion. Like, I always advise people to have an intentional and real background behind them versus
Yeah,
like
the virtual ones drive me crazy too. Right.
I was just gonna put one on.
Yeah.
I got jellyfish going in the background. It's kind of cool.
It's so interesting because the other like phenomenon that's happening across like generations and in the workplace and everything is like this very, very high level of sensitivity around like different anxieties that are coming up, and whether it's like, I don't want anyone to see where I am at all, which I totally understand from one perspective, but then I'm kind of like, well, but like, unless you have zero control, like the only like instance in which I'm like definitely use a virtual background is if you don't have control over your space.
Sure.
Right. If you're in an office and people are just like
It's a
wandering
public
around, use a
space or
virtual
something like
background.
that.
If you're in your bedroom and you just have your bed and that's the only option you have, then maybe use a virtual background. But like, if you have an ounce of control and like,
if you have any control at all,
it almost feels so isolated and lonely to me if you're not willing to, is it a self-value thing? I almost think like, I don't want anyone to see who I am. What is that? It's not, it's not the man behind the mask kind of scenario there.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are a number of reasons, and it's like, you have to, of course, respect people's experiences and all that. And so I always have to be quite diplomatic in how I share these things in a coaching session.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just feel like there are a number of benefits to connecting virtually and being able to like share like all of your favorite, most interesting books behind you. And like, they've come up a lot where people are like, oh, like, what's like a book, or like, what's the most like interesting book, whatever, and that you've read, or most influential. And I can just say, oh, like, People Watching.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or whatever, or Snow Crash, like.
But I feel like that's it actually, and I've leaned in on the poster thing, but and so that's my thing now. Like, now I actually like kind of guide the conversation there if I get a sense that they're music or art related. But I can see, I've seen this work before too. A lot of my author clients or friends, like, they'll have books behind them. And I feel like that's like an invitation for a couple things. Like, one, talk to me about books because I'm literate and I value reading and knowledge acquisition. And sometimes it's their books and it's like, please ask me about my book. Right. Like, and it's like sort of, it's a tool right? Yeah, like Tom's cooking book is on the wall right there, right? Like, so,
Right, totally.
but it's like it's an invitation that can be very subtle,
Yeah.
but it should be crafted. Jerry Sandusky, who's the Baltimore Ravens announcer,
Yeah.
is in a networking group that I belong to. And right when COVID started, he actually did a whole series of webinars for free, advising people on broadcasts. Talk about bringing ballet into your space, right? He's been a broadcaster for 30 years. So he knows every stupid little hack about being on camera. So he's like, get a phone book, a box, you all have Amazon coming, find a box eventually that's about the height of your face.
Totally.
And put your laptop on that so that the camera's not going up your nose or, like side to side, look in the fucking camera, like, like do this. And they were brain dead simple things that any idiot could have done, but nobody thought of because the camera's on our laptop shell and the shell is always at like not a 90
weird
degree.
angle.
It's at a weird angle. So it's up my nose. That's just part of it.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, dude, go out to Amazon, spend $10 on a light, put it in front of the fucking computer. Like, we're professionals here. Come on, guys.
Yes.
And I was laughing because I'm like, all that stuff was, I don't know, my day one. I'm like, oh, I need a camera, I need a light, I need a this, I need a that. And people were literally frantically writing notes, like as though he has like passed on some kind of ancient lost, you know, I was like laughing, but I mean, I guess if you don't think about it, you don't think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that's how I started. When the pandemic happened, I was like, oh, people are struggling.
Yeah.
People are struggling with the video. And so I was like, let me just, I host it actually similar to this gentleman you just mentioned. I hosted virtual presence webinars, like 45 minutes every week.
I love it.
And I would just, but then, so this was kind of where I started thinking, actually, if video is the channel of communication, like I don't need to be sitting here giving the same feedback over and over again.
For sure.
Like everyone, to an extent, needs to hear the same types of things, right? And so that was kind of, it was like running those workshops and repeating myself and seeing that like, oh, actually, everyone's struggling with the same things. And you can give one piece of universal feedback and have 10 different people integrate it differently in a way that feels authentic. I was like, I can do that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to sit here. Also, like you get scale. It's something that's difficult. Like coaching has like from a legacy perspective, never been scalable unless you have more and more human coaches. But with this technology, it's like we can scale.
Sure. Yeah, you don't need to, I mean, and this is like the fun part of the conversation, not that this hasn't been fun up to now, but like I own a development company.
And that was a beautiful segue there.
I'm super passionate about AI. We're over my head already at this level, involved in the development, the strategy, the planning of it. So I professionally, I have a huge interest in what you guys are doing over there and probably couldn't agree with you more, even though I don't even know everything about that. But let's use this opportunity to get into that. So you're right. That's a weirdly logical like chain, by the way. Like that is
right.
Like that just kind of
and it's so weird where the technology is still so fresh that it's a new idea for a lot of people, right? It's like, Chat GPT, Matt was messing with it when it first came out and he was the only one I knew that was talking about it,
right.
And now it's like, oh, you're not using it?
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I think I was right in my head here thinking, I'm like, yeah, there's no way that she didn't have those ninja skills translate here. And you absolutely looks like you have, because just hearing from the story, if I'm just taking a guess here, like, you're like, well, wait a minute, why, what am I, there's like a much easier way of doing this. I could explode this thing, like not,
And why keep repeating myself and reinventing the wheel and. Yeah.
But I'm in a lot of networking groups, Rachel, and I'll tell you what, 1% of people have the foresight you do. Like, I mean, and this is anything, not just in coaching, but I think this is particularly pandemic in coaching. There's this sort of like, I need to be the dude that does this. And that's not, I don't think, a necessity, right? Like, and in fact, it's the antithesis of scale, right?
Right. Yeah.
No,
yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think that, and at least from what I've observed, is that a lot of people have the ideas,
Right.
Right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
ideas are a dime a dozen, right? We
Yeah,
all know
Totally.
it's
that.
putting it into action.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, absolutely. It's like taking that leap and then doing it, which even having done it to an extent, I'm like,
Yeah.
hard.
But that's what got me into iPhone development. I remember when the SDK for iPhones came out, I was like, this is interesting. But like literally that month, there was a parallel sort of evolution happening to the SDK is people were getting used to iPhones. Like we hadn't had that luxury before. We had Trios, like there was Palm Pilots, like we had a couple like on-ramp,
Yeah.
technologies, but we
Yeah.
didn't really have this capacity. And I remember very early on going, you know what? Everybody has an idea for an iPhone app.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And to your point, most of them aren't going to go anywhere. But if this many people have an idea about an iPhone app, then there's going to be enough client traction there to support a business model around it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I wasn't wrong. And now we're seeing the same thing in AI. It's like, there's a lot of ideas out there. Wouldn't it be cool if, but I'm like, God, this feels like 2008 all over again. Like I had these conversations about iPhone apps.
But isn't that the nature of disruptive technology, right? It revolutionizes
sort of, yeah.
everything, and everyone has the idea, whether they have the know-how, resources,
right,
or even drive. Like I've got a notebook of things. I had this idea, and a friend of mine brought it to production without me ever having a conversation about it. I'm like, you know what? He did that better than I.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he's running with it. Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Rachel, one thing I noticed about Virtual Sapiens when I was looking around when we first met was that you are in a lot of the marketing material, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of Rachel everywhere in here, which, you know what, I absolutely love because to me, and I want you to kind of answer this, I guess, but my perception of this is like, this woman has got a commanding knowledge of what she wants to accomplish, and she is just making it. Like, I mean, you almost like force it into existence because it's you. You're describing it. Like, am I kind of near the base here? Like, am I?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are a small team. I have a co-founder who's technical, and we have a principal engineer who's just incredible. And then I have a business development associate who works with me. But definitely, our application is pretty unique even within the coaching space because we do approach it from a very particular, from a very scientific level on the nonverbal communication side. Like frequently communication, coaching, and training is focused on what are you saying, the content, the structure, et cetera. And those things are all critical. But my side is like fully just like the delivery. It's, like the breaking down these like kind of esoteric concepts around like gestures and like where do you look and why. And because I had an existing body of work, one of the things that was a competitive edge for us early on was that like we didn't have to go and hire actors or incentivize other coaches to develop content for us. We had it in-house through me.
From the training models and stuff, did you have a corpus of like recorded meetings and such that you could kind of train your models on and whatnot?
Yeah, so we didn't actually need to because we could develop the way computer vision works. Once you are using a model that is able to identify a human, it's really about how the different points, like as a constellation of points, it's how the different points orient and react to one another that define the algorithm and like what you're looking for.
So let's just clarify that real quick for myself, but for of course anybody who's listening and has no idea what that means.
I feel like we're jumping in a little bit.
Are we talking about like things like, hey, this person's shoulders are slouchy, or they're frowning, or they just gave the middle finger, or like, I mean, what level are we talking about?
Are we at micro expressions as well, or?
So we get data on micro expressions. We only report out on facial expression variation. So like if your face is a mesh of 300 points, 300 different data points.
Is that a real number, by the way, or are we just kind of going that's a real number. Okay.
Yeah, it's like
that's interesting.
Over like 300 points for just the face. I think in total it's over like 500 or 600 total, right?
Because
that's crazy. We're only looking at really
you know what's so weird? I'm giving a lecture on microsystems in acupuncture, and they have a scalp acupuncture system that is modern, and it's based off the homunculus model, right? So what's the biggest area? Head and face. That's where we have most, sensory motor receptors.
Yeah.
And then like our body's this tiny little thing, our hands are big, our feet are big, but it's the head by and large. So I mean it makes perfect sense even from something pretty old.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Well, because I think it's like, like this is a point, this is a point.
Yeah.
And then it's like, this is a point, this is a point, this is a point, this is a point.
Yeah. A lot on the face. So why don't you, is there a technical reason that you don't dive deeper into the micro expression side? It seems like you've got the data to do that. Is there any...
it's actually, it's such an interesting question. We actually used to report out on specific emotions that we detected. But there's a difference between a detected emotion and a felt sense of emotion, like that person's felt sense of emotion. So we would be saying like, or our AI would be saying like, for 30% of that call, you were angry or you looked angry.
So what if somebody has a resting bitch face? They're kind of screwed.
And they would just be like, oh, I wasn't angry. And it's like, we're not saying that you're angry. We're saying you looked angry. But it's like those little nuances. One of the biggest learnings in building a technology application is that people do not read anything.
Rachel, I've been making websites for 30 years.
Oh my God.
Every single person, this doesn't happen anymore because I'm just a sarcastic asshole about it. But like when I get every founder I've ever worked with, every CEO, when it comes time to do the team page, I get fucking War and Peace back. And I'm like, guys, literally no one's going to read this.
Like, you got maybe 5 or 6 words if you're lucky.
Maybe. Maybe. Like, oh my God. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. So like the way that we give people the way that the AI is instructed to give people feedback has literally taken we're always tweaking it because we'll have users like, for example, one of our we have these perception-based categories that we report out on. And each perception-based category has a cluster of individual behaviors that influence it, right? So for example, perceived trustworthiness and rapport is one of our perception-based categories. And it's based off of things like when the other people are talking, are you oriented towards the screen? Are you engaging in like head movement?
Yeah.
When you're talking, are you using hand gestures effectively? Or are you like using hand gestures and like, covering your face and your mouth, right?
Oh, we just got diagnosed, Matt.
Yeah, I know. Now I'm sitting there like, shit, sit on my hands.
It's been 42 minutes of me.
Yeah.
Right. So
she's like, I'll be sending you the report after this call. Don't you worry.
But
Tom has no idea what's going on this entire lecture. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's funny because we had to get so specific about how we presented that feedback because people would be so quick to be like, are you saying I'm not trustworthy? And we'd be like, no, not.
So that's a real delicate balance.
Disclaimers, like everywhere we have these things that are basically saying like the AI is a mirror. It is reflecting behaviors back at you and then telling you how those might influence someone's perception of you. We're not like the AI.
Yeah, we're not accusing you of being a dickhead. We're just saying you look like a dickhead.
But that's,
Yeah. But that's saying you are.
It's funny because it's one of the things that makes giving feedback on presence and communication so hard. Because at some point you have to say like, oh, by the way, you're speaking with vocal fry.
Right.
You're making yourself not sound as intelligent, right? You have upspeak or you, like your face. When you're listening, it sounds like you're completely disinterested and actually like a little angry.
And here's the thing, RBF is like a cute little TikTok term that we have for this. But like the reality is that like these are teachable. These are skills that can be taught out of. And like what always drives me crazy, I'm not to get a little too crazy here, but like one of my issues with the modern sensitivities as they stand today is that if you reverse 20 years, right?
Yeah.
An actor looking to be more hired or hireable who had a Southern accent would very often take elocution lessons or whatever it's called to like dial out their Southern accent. Why? Because society deemed that to sound less educated.
Well, I mean, wasn't that even like the golden era of film where they had this nondescript?
Totally.
Yeah,
right. You know, like it's not regional.
Yes.
It's English. It's an American style, but nobody really talks
clear.
like that.
Yeah, right. It's crystal clear. Everyone could understand it. And it was about transmission of your message over any kind of judgment about it, right? Like it was like Jerry Sandusky's thing. Don't look up your fucking nose. Let's just put the camera at your eye level. It wasn't like saying your nose is unattractive. It's just saying this is less attractive.
Yeah,
than not
I see how so many people would find that almost as a personal attack, though. You know, oh my God, you're saying this negative thing about me. And it's like, no, this is data.
Right. But like Rachel, like I've always been a nerd about like, you know, the first lesson I ever watched on Masterclass was Chris Voss about like hostage negotiation. And he is a master at reading micro expressions, which is why he's so good at hostage negotiation. But one of the things that like he had was like the Duquesne smile versus a Pan Am smile, right? Like little stupid things like that. And I'm like, you know, that's not a tremendously known fact, but it's actually something that you could look for. And now that once you hear about it, you're like, oh, that's a real smile. I landed a joke, right? Like you could use that very practically in an everyday thing versus
Matt, remember when we did, what was the episode on? But we were actually talking about, it was foreigners thinking that we, if, you know, you're either drunk, crazy, or an American because of how we smile. And so often, and is there a cultural competency component to this? Like, I mean, clearly country to country, you know, we already have stereotypes. Oh, the Germans, they're not funny. They don't take a joke. Everything's serious. But there's some like, well, if I'm speaking or I'm on camera with this other group in a different part of the world, I'm sure AI has the ability to translate that. But when like I even had a teacher once that he said, you're really smart, but you smile too much. What the hell does that mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, and why? He was Chinese. He's like, no, you want to present yourself and carry yourself like a professional. And like, I was like 20. I don't know what the hell to do with that.
Yeah.
I'm a goofy kid, man.
So yes, we, the way we approach different like cultural idiosyncrasies is, again, in the way that we provide feedback, we don't provide overly prescriptive feedback. So your example of the smile, right? And this goes back to like another reason why we gave feedback on facial expression variation is that we can tell people like you didn't vary your facial expressions very much, right? So you were kind of
you masking
or
flat. Something.
Yeah. It was flat, or you were like,
you were overdoing it. Yeah.
It doesn't matter, but like a constant, like non-changing facial expression, especially over video, is very disconcerting for the audience. And so we encourage like different dynamic facial expression variation and use. And even still, though, a lot of people see that and they're like, oh, so I should smile more. Like, no.
You're missing the forest through the trees here, dude.
Again, it's one of those like disclaimers nobody reads, but we're like, this doesn't, if you scored low in this category, it doesn't mean you should smile more. Right. Facto. Like certainly if it makes sense for the context and you feel like you should maybe, or you want to smile more, great, but like it has to be your decision.
Right. Otherwise it just feels like a sociopath, right? You're just forcing it to happen and it's not really.
And and like what we do know is that like, again, over video, not having any changes in your facial expression is perceived as more negative.
That makes sense though.
Yeah.
And so if that's what the science says, then we can design our models around like we just want you to not be totally monotonous. We want you to have nice variation in your facial expressions. It doesn't have to be smiling. You know, it can be other different like empathy oriented facial expression changes. It's up to you.
So when you're presenting this information, I assume you get all kinds of personality types that ingest it. It seems like you touched on a couple of them, but let's just talk about real quick, the ninjas that come out of you that take your information and really absorb it. Like, how are people using your information in the most effective way, right? Like how is that trained?
Wait, I'm back. Can we get to that? But I want to ask kind of like a precursor question. Is this where somebody would ask you to come in and they're presenting and there's an audience and you're using this technology on the audience, or is this you're actively capturing it for the presenter? And then let's get into Matt's thing, because I think that's
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's actually the AI is only a coach for you.
Okay.
So we only ever analyze the individual who is using our technology. It just helps us from a consent perspective. It also helps from a like totally false representation of someone, because at the end of the day, even the most like skilled nonverbal professionals like get it wrong 50% of the time.
Oh.
That makes sense.
So this is an imperfect
that's believable.
Science. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we're just not going to go there. There are companies who like do that. And I'm like,
Right.
No,
but I mean, I guess, when we build technology for a client, one of the topics that comes up a lot is like, what else could we do with this? Since we're already building this, what else could we do with it? Because they just want to see how much mileage they can get out of a project, which makes total sense from a fiduciary standpoint. But like in your case, I would think that this would be actually kind of practical too. I mean, if you've got an AI model trained up, it knows what it's talking about, like aiming the camera in the other direction. Could we not?
Yeah. And that's kind of why I asked that. Like, if I'm sitting here presenting to a group on Zoom of 100 people, did I kill it? Did I not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious.
80% of them were staring off into space.
Right. So here's the issue. Let's take your scenario of you're presenting in front of 100 people. We're using our AI to analyze the video feeds, assuming that everyone's on video of those 100
and it's
people.
Consensual and all that stuff. Yeah.
And you have like 20% of the class that's like this.
Yeah.
They're paying attention. It's just that their
video's not there. Yeah.
Their video's not
their
in
camera's
front of their
off
face or something like that. Yeah.
So the AI would be like, okay, well, listen, Tom, 20% of the people were completely staring off screen. And so you didn't reach them at all. And it's like, no, actually, it was very riveting. They were very engaged, but the AI can't tell what that person's experience is. They can't tell that they have multiple screens and you happen to be on a side screen. Same thing as if, like, in order for the AI to work, you have to assume that people are on camera properly. And if this is all you're getting.
Right.
Yeah. So some of the onboarding for this technology is you're telling who's ever presenting, here's how you got to frame yourself and everything.
Yeah. Like one of the most, some of the biggest wins, and this kind of feeds back to your question, Matt, but some of the biggest wins that we see our users, or biggest changes that we see up front, are like framing, lighting.
Sure.
Those little basics.
Yeah, because again, like if you're not framed properly, if all we see is your head, then you could be using hand gestures.
I feel like I'm leaning in too much and my head's too shiny.
No, I mean, but it seems like those people are more interested in those little wins in aggregate rather than looking for a silver bullet, which is like your prototype that says, oh, this means I must smile more, right? And you're like,
yeah.
Well, and then it's the implication is to practice these things and see what is working.
Right.
Yeah. You know what though? I mean, Rachel, the people that do sort of most efficiently use or effectively use your product, I mean, is there a personality type behind that? I would suspect that there's a tight correlation between this type of personality, like people that like yourself, like that want to just show up in a specifically predictable way. Like, is that sort of, are these tied together at all or not really?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we mostly will look at the like score-based data, which tracks progress from like within an individual's own account of like however many assessments you've taken and how you've been progressing over time. And we can also look at like in aggregate across a team in terms of like how are they improving based on our metrics. And we perceive success when the majority of people are taking more assessments and improving over the course of the number of assessments they're taking, because that tells
what's the
us
time frame on that normally?
it can be honestly depends. Some people typically like the best and greatest gains are made over like the course of a month.
Okay.
Using our product.
That's not a terribly long amount of time.
It's not. We do, though, recommend that people continue to check in with the tool over the course of like 6 months to a year, because as we know, like in order for changes to actually be sticky,
sure.
Right? Like it's what like some people will use our product like multiple times in one day, and they will see like a 50% gain in like improvement.
Yeah, they're like,
because they have it all fresh in their head, though. Yeah,
it's also like a game, you know, like you're like, oh, I was told I need to use like fewer hand gestures, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna like do it again, and then you hit score, and you're like, great,
nailed it.
Yeah, go on to the next metric, and it's great, and you're improving, but it's like the integration component obviously is gonna like, for it to feel like second nature.
Yeah,
it takes more practice.
I love the fact that you're training the habits, right? Because that's where you see that long-term gain.
Mm-hmm.
What I guess what would be the reason somebody would seek you out and do this?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like a double-edged sword of our product, is that like everyone is on video to an extent.
Yeah,
So many people could be great applications or great users for our tool. But we find that actually the biggest success with like leadership development programs at companies where like managers and directors have to like motivate and inspire entire teams, and like maybe video is like the only channel that they can
how
use,
it goes.
Sure.
Right, to get everyone in the same room at the same time. So leadership development programs are great for us. Onboarding new hires, that's another great use case. Like, welcome to this company. We use video a lot. Use this tool to make sure that you can show up and authentically represent yourself.
Right.
Sales is another obvious one, because managers want to make sure that their sellers are showing up over video no matter where they are and representing the product service effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And that yeah, those are all pretty logical reasons why somebody would use it. I think where I'm excited about where you're at and the technology in general is at is, I think across the board, making these kind of observations, these tools are super present now than they weren't. And so like, if you really want to just hone that edge, this is not a hard way to do it. Right. And we just have so many kinds of options to do this that, like, we don't have a sales team per se.
Right.
We mostly have friendships with our clients. Like we are in concert with them. So it's a little different of a dynamic, but like if I had a sales team and they weren't performing, I'd kind of almost want to use this as a way to find out why. Be like, hey, is there something stupid that they're doing that we could dial out real simply?
Yeah.
Or are they just the wrong fit?
Right.
You know, I'm immediately looking at implications in healthcare, and we can see structural gait things, and it's far less than the face, right? You can watch somebody walk back and forth in front of a camera, and you go, hey, this leg's shorter than that one, your shoulders, forward rotated, all these little things that like you would have to pay somebody to do. It would cost so much to have a practitioner there, and even then, they're going to get it wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that like the technology in and of itself lends itself to things like that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we've been very strict about like our focus being on communication behaviors, because otherwise, like, we would spend all day being like, about this.
What else can you do with it? I mean, that's the scary thing, right? I got this new toy, and how are we playing with it? Yeah,
exactly.
That's like the curse of AI in general, man. I wake up every single day and have to fight off the temptation to cancel my meetings and dive down a new rabbit hole.
Right.
It's just like, there's no shortage of like, holy crap, this is amazing. Yeah, and then the entrepreneur in me is like, somebody's going to get this idea first, and I'm going to watch them make a million, quadrillion. Yeah. Like, so speaking of like your discipline, like what is the roadmap look like for you guys? Do you have a roadmap? I mean, where are you going with this thing?
Yeah. I mean, on the one side, I don't see a reason why this tool can't be used and tailored to meet the needs of a variety of like all the Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
And then, because we can customize a lot of what we do to meet specific like use cases. So one of our goals is to get into some of these larger companies, even just in the small like a small instance, and then like land and expand, right? Scale more broadly throughout that. The other option and avenue is, we do a lot of partnerships with other training firms. So training firms who are more human facilitator, like live in-person training type focus, like we can support them as a technology partner. And
why not put them in
an
front of a camera as well? Yeah.
And actually, I am going to talk to you after the show. I actually may have one of those with Joe's thing, Tom.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, that would be the first person I would think about. Yeah.
We actually have a colleague that's got a video-based analysis program in a completely different vein than you're working on, but the two of you guys should definitely know each other because you're like two sides of a coin kind of thing. Like you guys have zero overlap, but 100. Your Venn diagram is one giant football, right? Like it's
totally.
like so yeah, we'll get to that after, but yeah, there is a lot of like connections, and I also think that like you touched on something that I think is also another hallmark of where we're at from a technology standpoint. You go back to the 90s and the early 2000s, you had like Dropbox or LinkedIn or some big company that sucked all the oxygen out of the room, and like we're still largely dealing with those people. But now a technology like yours, you could partner with more people than know you exist, right? Like we have
roll
the
that
ability
out to everybody. Yeah.
Right. We have this weird ability that we didn't have before where you could just plug in to, 100 different companies, make all the money you ever needed to as a company, but like only people that have heard about you might be those 100 people. Like, and that's like, podcasting is a similar thing, right? You don't have to have like
you don't need millions and millions of people listening. You just need dedicated people in your niche. Yeah.
Right. And that's like look, I'm 48. I learned the other way, right? The other way was you have to be LinkedIn in order to be successful.
You need a net, not a fishing rod.
Yeah. And I fight that every day, and I love hearing stories about what you're on because I'm like, God, she can kill this in so many different ways.
I would play with it, and I don't really think I have. Like, I don't think I'm your ideal client. It's super interesting to me. Like, how am I projecting myself to the world?
Right.
That's a question I would love to have an answer for.
Right. Yeah. One of the things for our call to action is like, how are people perceiving you?
Right. And I guess, it's funny, we're all on a podcast right now, but like, that's kind of another group of people that would probably be very interested in a technology like this because,
you're in front of the camera the whole time. Yeah. There's no hiding.
Right.
And it is funny. We make fun. I've been a photographer. I went to school and I decided not to do that, but it was always sort of like my ADHD creativity.
Yeah.
And so like I got classically trained in photography. I mean, I understand the concepts. And when I saw Instagram like kind of explode, I see all these usually girls on Instagram messing up these photography sort of paradigms, right? Where they're like, instead of thinning your body to the camera, they're doing like a full sideways thing and their knees over, and you're like, you're falsely contrappostoed in a weird sideways thing. I'm like, this is not at all like what you were trying to do. Like I know what you're trying to do, and it's not this.
Right.
And like, so I wish there was a little bit more literacy in this category in general, because it could do them so, aside from annoying people like me who know what they're messing up, how much better would they present if they just did it the right way rather than like some weird like interpretation of what they heard,
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So how do we find you? Where do we send people to you? Like, let's break that open real quick.
Yeah. So in terms of following what we're up to, LinkedIn is the best.
Got it.
Whether you want to just follow myself or Virtual Sapiens on LinkedIn. And then anyone who's interested in checking out the platform can start the process for free through our website.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you go through one simulated conversation is what we call it. You'll see me.
Yeah, lots of Rachel.
Recorded.
Yeah, lots of Rachel.
But you get like an idea, you get some like upfront feedback, you get an idea of some of how the AI kind of works. And then we don't have like a super strong focus on B2C because we do mostly sell into businesses, but everyone has it. Like if someone's really interested in unlocking or whatever, like we can do that for them.
Well, and awesome. Even nowadays, to kind of, I think we touched on this before, sometimes the consumer is the business, they're all a one-man show, especially if they're YouTube creators or something like that.
Yep, totally.
Well, it's funny because that guy that I'm going to tell you about after we break, I mean, he just launching his third book and his books are New York Times bestsellers, Wall Street Journal bestsellers. So like, those guys that are in that sort of strata, everything is perception, right? Like, I mean, it's, you got to dial that thing in real sharp,
and that's like the professional Olympic level athlete, what can I do to get that one extra tenth of a second off my time or get a little bit more weight up in the air. So this sounds like a way to do that quickly and effectively.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, I don't want to hold your whole day up because it is a Friday and you do probably have to work today, but well, at a minimum, I have to work today, and so eventually got to get back to that. But this was awesome. I thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Like, really fun conversation. Great questions.
Yeah, no. And we will put link to the show notes and everything, and hopefully we can spread some news for you. I think this is a great product. So,
thank you.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the weekend, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Everybody, take care.
Take care.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.